Staying with public health, should international organizations decide what you can and can't do if they declare a health emergency? That's at the center of this recent development, the World Health Organization softening some of the language in its pandemic agreement.
This agreement sought to centralize and strengthen its power when it comes to health emergencies if it declares one. I spoke with Kevin Stocklin, a reporter for the Epoch Times and the producer of the Shadow State documentary, to explain some of the specifics and how it affects you.
Well, what they've done generally is try to water down some of the language. So there were some areas that have caused specific concern. You know, the WHO is always saying that this treaty and the amendments to the international health regulations, they have no effect on national sovereignty. They said, oh, it only includes language like may and suggests, never, must or shall or commit to. And then you look at the document and it has more than 100 cases of using, forced language like countries shall and commit to and will. And so what they've done is try to water down some of that language. They have tried to, some of the language that they had in there, one of the most egregious cases was they actually had deleted one of their original principles that had respect for, I'll quote, full respect for the dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms of persons. They had taken that out of the last draft and replaced it with the principles of equity and inclusivity. So those are some things that they've watered down to try to get this through.
Does the WHO's revision making its recommendations non-binding give power back to sovereign states in making pandemic-related decisions?
Well, it doesn't. It softens the language, but there's enough things in there that still, the WHO is still the central authority when it comes to pandemic response, according to these documents. It still grants the WHO the authority to declare any sort of health emergency under a pandemic. So a lot of those powers still remain. There's also a lot of concerns about censorship and controlling messaging. And initially, the WHO had the authority to be the central kind of determinant and coordinating messaging and fighting misinformation. They've toned that down a bit, but it still leaves the WHO as the central authority. States view this as a step in the right direction, but really not going far enough. And frankly, a lot of concerns are still raised. Why should the WHO have any authority like this at all? Why are we vesting this authority in the United Nations given their performance under COVID?
Right, and so is one central concern here the WHO's track record in handling the pandemic, or is it mostly that individual states like to handle it differently?
It's both. So certainly the WHO's track record under COVID was not good. They were not good at spreading accurate information about the source or the characteristics of the pandemic. This provision that they had struck that they put back in about respect for individual rights, this is very important given the experience under the WHO of forced mandates, school closures, all sorts of other violations of civil rights. And so those things people feel at an individual level should be emphasized in the treaty much more than they are.
Well, thank you so much for your update. Kevin Stocklin, reporter at the Epoch Times and producer of the Shadow State documentary.
Thanks, Kevin.